Welcome to Sinister Stories, where the real world intersects with the supernatural. Tonight, I'm going to share with you 10 terrifying and bone-chilling stories, all from random people who sent them to me on Instagram. These are not just stories to make your skin crawl. They're true accounts, filled with unexplained occurrences that will leave you questioning everything. The individuals who sent me these stories are just like you, ordinary people, yet they've experienced things that can't be explained. So, sit back, grab a drink, and prepare yourself for a night of horror you won't soon forget. And remember, if you have a spine-chilling story of your own, feel free to reach out to me on Instagram. Your story might just be the next one shared with the world. Let's begin. Story 1. The Midnight Visitor. Shared by Sarah. Sarah sent me a message late one night, and what she told me still haunts me. She lives in an apartment on the 10th floor of an older building. One winter night, she was reading a book in bed when she heard a knock on her front door. Now, living in a big city, she didn't think much of it. Maybe it was a neighbor, maybe a delivery. But when she opened the door, there was no one there. The hallway was completely empty. A chill ran down her spine, but she thought maybe it was just a figment of her imagination. That's when things took a darker turn. As she lay in bed, the knocking sound started again, but this time it was followed by the sound of footsteps, slow, deliberate steps approaching her door. Sarah got up, heart pounding, and peeked out the peephole. But again, there was no one there. She returned to her bed, trying to calm down. But then, she heard something even worse, the sound of someone breathing just outside her door. She didn't open the door again. And the next morning, when she checked the hallway, there was nothing. No one. Just silence. To this day, Sarah doesn't know who or what was knocking at her door that night. Story 2. The Disappearing Child. Shared by Alex. Alex's story is one that will make you question what you know about the supernatural. He was walking home from the store late one evening when he noticed a young girl standing alone in the middle of the street. She was staring down at the ground, completely still. Alex, concerned, approached her and asked if she was lost or needed help. The girl didn't respond. She just kept staring at the pavement. When Alex got closer, he noticed how pale she was and how still she stood in that cold night air. The girl finally looked up, and Alex saw her face, hollow, lifeless eyes, and a smile that stretched unnaturally wide across her face. That was when Alex realized something was terribly wrong. He stepped back, but the girl didn't move. She just continued to stand there, grinning. Suddenly, Alex heard a car speeding down the street. When he turned back to the girl, she was gone. Completely gone. There was no trace of her, no footprints, nothing. Alex ran home, shaken, and the next day he found out that a child had gone missing in that area years ago. The description was chillingly similar to the girl he had seen. Story 3. The Woman in the Mirror. Shared by James. James's story is one of pure dread. He had recently moved into an old Victorian house, and while unpacking, he found an antique mirror in the attic. It was large, ornate, and covered in years of dust. He decided to clean it up and place it in his bedroom. The first few nights were uneventful, but that all changed one evening when he was brushing his teeth. As he glanced at the mirror, he noticed something wrong. A woman's face appeared behind him, staring directly at him. She had dark, hollow eyes, and her lips were twisted into a strange smile. James spun around, but there was no one in the room. He turned back to the mirror, and the woman was still there, now standing closer. Panicked, he quickly turned off the bathroom light, but when he switched it back on, she was gone. The mirror was still in his bedroom, but every time James walked past it, he felt the presence of the woman watching him. James did some research and learned that the previous owner of the house was a woman who died under mysterious circumstances. He could never get rid of the mirror, and to this day, he feels the woman's eyes following him wherever he goes. Story 4. The Haunted Bedroom, shared by Emily. Emily shared a disturbing tale about her childhood home. She and her sister shared a bedroom in their old house, and from the beginning, something felt off. The room was always cold, despite the heater being on full blast. Strange noises would come from the walls at night, and both girls often woke up feeling like someone was watching them. One night, as Emily lay in bed trying to fall asleep, she felt a cold breath on her neck. She turned around quickly, but there was no one there. At first, she dismissed it as her imagination, but things only got worse. A few nights later, Emily was alone in the room, when suddenly she heard whispers coming from the corner of the room. She rushed to the corner, only to find it empty. But the air felt colder than ever. Terrified, Emily and her sister moved out of the room, but the presence remained. It wasn't until years later that Emily found out that the house had once belonged to a woman who had passed away tragically in that very room. Now, Emily believes the whispers were her way of asking for help. Story 5. The Dark Figure in the Woods, shared by Michael. Michael messaged me after an experience he had while camping with friends deep in the woods. They were miles away from any town or city, enjoying the peacefulness of nature, when strange things started happening. At first, it was just little things: a branch snapping in the distance, the faint sound of footsteps in the woods. That night, as they sat around the campfire, they all heard it at the same time, a rustling in the bushes. The sounds grew louder, and out of the darkness, a tall, shadowy figure emerged. The figure didn't say a word, just stood there, watching them with glowing eyes. Michael and his friends were paralyzed with fear, not knowing whether they should run or stay. But just as quickly as the figure appeared, it vanished back into the darkness. They spent the rest of the night huddled together in terror, not daring to move. The next morning, they left the campsite, but Michael couldn't shake the feeling that whatever he had seen wasn't human. Story 6. The Poltergeist Prank, shared by Sarah. Sarah's story is one of those that makes you wonder if some things are just better left unexplained. She was having a sleepover with a few friends, and as they all settled down for the night, strange things started happening. First, a cup moved across the table on its own. Then, a chair slid out from the corner. At first, they laughed it off, thinking it was a prank. But as the night wore on, things escalated. The lights flickered, and the sound of footsteps echoed through the house. Sarah's friends were no longer laughing. They were scared. Then, they all heard a voice, a low, guttural whisper coming from the kitchen. Sarah tried to investigate, but as soon as she stepped into the room, all the cabinets slammed shut at once. The group left the house immediately, but Sarah was convinced that they hadn't just experienced a poltergeist, they had encountered something far more sinister. Story 7. The Footsteps in the Hallway, shared by Lily. Lily's story is one that's haunted her since she moved into an old apartment complex. It was a quiet suburban area, and she thought it would be a peaceful place to live. But from the moment she moved in, she began to hear strange noises late at night, soft footsteps echoing down the hallways. At first, she brushed it off as the building settling, or maybe other tenants moving around. But it wasn't long before the footsteps grew louder and more distinct. One night, Lily was lying in bed when she heard the footsteps approach her door. They stopped right outside, and for a moment, everything went quiet. Then, a gentle knock on the door. She froze, too afraid to open it. After a long pause, the footsteps began again, slowly walking away. The next morning, Lily checked the hallway, but there was no one around. She mentioned the incident to her neighbor, only to find out that a woman had died in the apartment directly across the hall years ago. To this day, Lily believes that the footsteps belong to the woman who still roams the building. Story 8. The Poltergeist Prank, shared by Sarah. Sarah's experience was a shocking one. She and her friends were at her house for a sleepover, playing games and having fun, but it quickly turned into a nightmare. It all started with a glass of water sliding across the table on its own. At first, they thought it was just a prank, a trick of the mind, or maybe an accidental push. But as the night wore on, more strange things began happening. The lights flickered, doors slammed shut, and objects moved without anyone touching them. But the creepiest moment came when they all heard a voice, a deep, raspy whisper from the darkness that said, "Get out!" Sarah and her friends were paralyzed with fear. They tried to leave the room, but the door wouldn't open. It was as if something was holding them inside. The next morning, when they finally left, they found the room in chaos, as if something or someone had been throwing objects around. The house was never the same for Sarah after that night. Story 9. The Woman in the Woods, shared by Ryan. Ryan and his friends decided to go camping in the woods for a weekend trip. They were far away from the nearest town, surrounded by the sounds of nature. But on the second night, things started to get eerie. Around midnight, they heard soft rustling sounds coming from the woods around them. At first, they thought it was just an animal, but then they saw something moving between the trees. It was a woman, barefoot, in a tattered white dress, with long, unkempt hair. Ryan called out to her, but she didn't answer. Instead, she turned toward them with a chilling smile. Her face was pale, her eyes empty, and she walked toward them slowly, almost as if she were floating. The group backed away, but she continued to follow them, never speaking, just watching them with that same unsettling grin. As they ran back to their tents, they turned around to see that the woman had disappeared without a trace. The next day, they discovered that the woods were known for being haunted, and that many years ago, a woman had disappeared in the very same area, never to be found again. Ryan never went camping again after that experience. Story 10. The Final Encounter, shared by Sarah. Sarah reached out to me with the most unsettling story of all. After years of hearing strange noises, feeling watched, and having her life disrupted by unexplained events, she decided to confront whatever had been haunting her. She had spent countless nights awake, listening to the creaks and whispers that came from the corners of her house. But this time, she was determined to face it. On a cold, moonless night, she entered the house with only a flashlight, ready to confront the source of her fear. As she walked through the darkened rooms, the whispers started again, growing louder and more frantic. Then, she heard the sound of heavy footsteps behind her, but when she turned around, no one was there. At that moment, the temperature dropped drastically, and the lights flickered. Sarah walked into the living room, and there it was, the dark shadow that had been following her all these years, standing in the corner of the room with glowing red eyes. But this time, Sarah didn't run. She stepped toward it, saying, "I'm not afraid of you anymore." The shadow slowly began to fade away, disappearing into the darkness. The house was quiet for the first time in years. Sarah left that night, but her experience had changed her forever. She said, "Some things you can't escape, no matter how hard you try." And to this day, she believes the shadow is still out there, waiting for her to return. And that, my friends, was a glimpse into the darkest corners of reality. These are not just stories, they are real-life encounters shared with me by those who experienced them. What do you think? Are these just tales meant to scare, or is there something more? If you have a terrifying story of your own, something that's too scary to keep to yourself, don't hesitate to reach out to me on Instagram. Maybe your story will be shared next. But be warned, some stories should never be told. Stay safe and remember, not everything that goes bump in the night is just a figment of your imagination. Until next time, keep watching the shadows.